Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 8 true Airbnb horror stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Now, let's begin. I don't like admitting I scared myself before anything actually happened, but I did. I'd been traveling all day, trained a bus to a rideshare with a driver who kept tapping his brakes like we were on a metronome, and by the time we pulled up to the brick walk-up, the street was mostly emptied of voices. Restaurants were shutting their metal gates with that grating roll and clank, and a single laundromat across the way was still breathing warm air into the cold night. The building had one of those narrow entryways where your bag scrapes the doorframe no matter how you angle it. Above the intercom, the keypad waited, its rubber buttons worn shiny at 1, 2, and 0. The host had messaged an hour earlier. Self-check-in. Use code ZO829. Safe travels. I slowed down when I read it. 0829. My birthday. Month and day. I never use it for anything. I don't put it on social media. On the platform, I think I set my birthday to the first of the month when I signed up, just to avoid it being one more piece of me floating around. I stood there with my bag handle cutting into my palm, telling myself it was coincidence. 4 digits, 2 of them, the most common numbers in any code. People like round numbers. People reuse dates. I should have just typed it, gone upstairs and collapsed. Instead, I tried another code first, the check-in date, and it buzzed at me, a flat, disapproving tone. I typed 0829 and the lock gave a soft, almost contented click. The stairwell lights came on and a staggered trail up the stairs as if a person was walking ahead of me, one flight at a time. They weren't motion sensors, not the way I've seen them, not with that polite delay. They turned on just before my foot hit the next step. It felt like being expected. The apartment door had another keypad, same worn buttons. The same code worked, and I pushed the door open with my shoulder. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of detergent and lemon peels. A clean place, market ready. The kind of white throw pillows you're supposed to arrange with the zipper facing down. A framed map of the city in invented colors. A plant that was either very real or very expensive. When I set my bag down, a strip of lights along the hall flickered on, one by one. Bedroom first, then bathroom, then the tiny kitchenette, as if someone were walking backward and turning them on with their fingertips. The thermostat on the wall woke up to a glow and showed 71 degrees. That's nothing on its own. 71 is a normal number, but it was my number. The exact one I set every time I travel because hotels are too hot and friends' places are always freezing. The last rental I stayed in had fought me for 24 hours before I got it to hold at 71 without bouncing to eco mode. I stared at the digital 71 and felt the polite click of the lock behind me as it relatched. I messaged the host. All set. In. Thanks. He replied immediately, the way some hosts do when they're trying to stay 5 stars across the board. Great. Everything should be set to your preference. Quiet hours 9 to 7. Let me know if you need anything. I thumbed the message a few times, wondering what your preference meant. It was probably canned language. Probably. I put water on for tea. The kettle was one of those low-slung matte ones everyone photographs, sitting on a base with a tiny digital display. It blinked to life with 212F, like it knew what I wanted before I dialed it. I touched the knob and told myself it was just the default. Default doesn't mean anything except that someone else used it last. Still, the apartment felt like a room I'd already left once, only I couldn't remember when, and the ridiculous thing is, I was grateful. Tired people are easy to flatter. It felt like care, and that made me want to trust it. When I finally moved toward the bedroom, the light clicked on before I reached the threshold. The bed was made tight, with a folded gray blanket at the foot. Exactly the shade I like. Or maybe all these blankets are that shade now. I put my phone on the nightstand and my thumb hovered over the app one more time. 0829, coincidence. 71, coincidence. Stair lights in sequence. Motion sensors. There's a rational explanation for everything. I told myself out loud, and caught my voice sounding smaller than I meant it to. The apartment didn't echo. It absorbed. I tried not to make a superstition of it. I changed clothes, brushed my teeth, and let the kettle chuff on the counter while my tea steeped. I took my mug to the couch, and when I sat down, the TV pulsed awake, blue logo fading into a home screen. I hadn't touched the remote. I told myself it was one of those occupancy features. Saves power but wakes when it sees motion. The remote lay exactly parallel to the edge of the coffee table, a little red plastic tab still attached to the battery cover, like no one had bothered to remove it. The menu populated with squares, news, an aquarium app, a city guide channel, and a carousel of recommendations. On the second row, I saw a show I'd watched at my last rental, 2 episodes in, and then I'd fallen asleep mid-episode. The thumbnail now said, "Continue watching." The name of the profile was Guest. I hadn't signed into anything. I tried to convince myself all the default guest profiles must look the same everywhere. I turned the TV off with the remote, pressing the button longer than a person needs to, as if I could make the silence stick. In that quiet, I heard the thermostat click, a thin relay sound, and then the rush of the air handler starting to push. I looked over and saw the 71 dip to 68 for a heartbeat, then climb back to 71. It was like the temperature had thrown itself against a fence and slid back to where it belonged. I walked over and tapped the screen. Hints popped up, friendly bubbles explaining how to set a schedule. I knew how. I'd done it before, dozens of times. I pressed the minus button to 69. The display held for a breath, and I felt the shift of the air, cooler, finer. Then, like a stubborn muscle relaxing, the number blinked and returned to 71, with a little tone that wasn't a scold so much as a smile. My thumb left a print on the glass. I went into the app to see if the host had some control setting. His welcome message had a link to the online manual and a note. Please keep thermostat between 68-72 to conserve energy. Fine. I pressed and held the hold button on the thermostat until it said manual, and again it slid to 71 without asking me. I laughed too loudly at that, the kind of laugh that's meant to prove you're above a thing. The sound of it died in the apartment like a fish in sand. At some point, the lock outside chirped, the same 4-beep pattern I recognized now, the cadence of my code. I didn't move for a second. The hall through the peephole was empty, but the beep came again, then the longer tone that means incorrect. Somebody drunk? Wrong door? I watched the peephole until my eye watered. No shadows on the frosted glass of the stairwell, no footsteps on the stairs. Then the soft click of the deadbolt retracting. Not my door, somewhere else on the floor. Other people live here, I told myself. Other people have codes and thumbs and habits. I closed my eye against the peephole and stayed there with my head leaned against the door until my own blood sounded like someone else's. When I turned back, the lights down the hall brightened in a neat line like an inhale, one to the next, then dimmed to their original level. I tested it. I stood still. They did nothing. I took one quiet step and they brightened ahead of me before my foot fell. It was impossible not to think of a person I couldn't see walking just out of reach, keeping exactly half a second ahead. Gooseflesh is a cheap shorthand for what happens to your skin when your brain starts asking your body to leave. What I felt was a tidal draw, like the floor had leaned a degree and my weight shifted without permission. I stepped back and the sequence reversed, fading from kitchen to bathroom to bedroom. On a reflex, I opened the guest binder. "Welcome" was printed in a cheerful font, followed by Wi-Fi info and a notice about trash day. In the corner of the first page, someone had penciled a tiny dot. Nothing else. I flipped the pages. Dust-free sheets, laminated emergency numbers, a section on restaurants with vegan options, no notes in the margin, no secret message. I realized I was looking for evidence of other people having seen what I was seeing, which is proof that I knew I was all read. Outside the usual. My phone buzzed. The host. "Everything to your liking?" It was exactly the message I'd expect, exactly when I'd expect it, which made it feel wrong. I typed, "All good," erased it, typed, "The thermostat keeps going back to 71, just checking if that's normal," and sent it. The dots appeared, disappeared. His reply, "Yes, it's on learning mode. It should adapt to your baseline quickly." Baseline is an odd word to use for how a person likes a room to feel. Baseline reminded me of heart monitors and the flat line you never want to see. I put my hand an inch from the vent and waited. The air slipped across my palm like the breath of someone pretending to be asleep. I told myself, smart home, sensor arrays. Someone configured something and forgot to clear the last person's data. But I hadn't used the same devices. Different cities, different hosts. Even the thermostats were different brands. I walked back to the door and slid the chain across, even though I knew it was mostly symbolic. The chain made a sound like an old zipper sealing a mouth. From bed, with the light off, I watched the faint spill of the hall lamps edging the door frame. Every 7 or 8 minutes, a soft click, the rise and settle of air. It would have been soothing if I hadn't felt the pattern lining up with my breath, if the apartment didn't feel like a hand I couldn't see, resting on my shoulder, adjusting when I did. It's funny what you do to make an ordinary explanation win. I lay there and assembled them like a lawyer picking a jury. The lock code could be a coincidence, or the host could have my birthday from the platform even if I thought I'd hidden it. People are lazy with codes. Maybe he always uses dates and just hit mine by chance. The thermostat could be defaulting to the median of 1,000 stayovers, and yes, 71 falls into the middle slipper where most of us sit. Lights could be on some algorithm that predicts movement so it feels smooth.
The TV could be logged into some rotating guest account shared among hosts in this neighborhood that just happens to keep watching the things people like me watch. I could map a line through those points and call it safe that I got up around 3 because sleeping felt too much like letting go. The kitchen tile had that cold that feels clean. I poured water and listened to the kind of silence that seems to be doing a job. The thermostat glowed without me touching it, like a nightlight. I pressed the display and opened the schedule for no good reason. There were entries I hadn't made: 2 a.m. hold, 6:30 a.m. warm. They were exactly the times I'd fought the last place's system to behave: shivering at 2, sticky at dawn. I stared at the tiny digital timeline, at the rectangles I could drag or delete. I deleted them. The screen blinked and they were back. I held my finger to the glass and watched my breath ghost the display. I walked away and waited for it to click that I messaged the host: "Could you set the lock to a random code? The one you sent is a date and I'm not comfortable with that." He answered at once: "Maybe awake, maybe a person who sleeps with his business under his pillow." "No problem." Updated. I opened the app and saw the new code: 0421. Not my birthday, not the check-in date, not anything. I said thank you. I tried it on the inside keypad, a stupid thing to do because you can't test a lock from within, but the beep pattern still played in my head like I could call it out of the metal. It stayed quiet. I took the chain off and opened the door to the hall as gently as I could, like I was cracking the seal on a jar. The corridor was stale with heat and laundry softener. No one stood there. The stair lights did their little wave of attention like goldfish when they think they're getting fed that I thought about leaving. I pictured myself repacking, walking down stairs with my bag rolling hard over each bump, calling a car, the embarrassment of showing up at a hotel and trying to explain why I needed a room when I already had a place. Being believed is its own kind of shelter, and I didn't think I could find that at 4 in the morning from a stranger behind a desk. I went back inside and locked the door and sat with my back to it for longer than I'll admit that in the morning. The apartment smelled like coffee before I'd made any. A neighbor, probably. The light in the kitchen was soft, and the city sounded alive again: buses sighing, people tripping and catching themselves, a dog tagging its nails on concrete. Normal overwhelmed whatever had happened and I let it. I showered. The tiles warmed under my feet because the bathroom floor was heated, a small luxury I took personally. I set a towel on the rack to keep and another to use because that's what I always do. I could see the pattern of me, the way I move through spaces, and I understood that a smart enough system could see it too. When I checked out, I put the key on the counter even though there wasn't one, habit from older places. I wiped the counter because I always do. On the way down the stairs, the lights went ahead of me in their careful sequence, and I let them escort me, because fighting small kindnesses takes energy I didn't have. Outside, the morning had that metallic cool that tastes like change in your mouth. I messaged the host: "Thanks for the stay." He sent back a thumbs up and a note about leaving a review. I promised I would and didn't. Weeks later, booking another place in another city, I noticed I was bracing for the code in the message thread. When it came, it wasn't my birthday. It wasn't even a date. I felt relief and something like disappointment, which made me feel ridiculous. I laughed at myself and closed the app. Then, as I was packing, my phone buzzed again: "Quick update. We've randomized your entry code to better match your previous preferences." Preferences. Not requests, not convenience. Preferences. The code was different.
The thermostat at that place, different brand, different exact shade of plastic, woke up at 71 the moment I crossed the threshold. No one wants to be the person who says houses learn you. That's not a thing houses do. But there's an unease that's hard to shake now, like each place I go has already had a conversation about me with the last place. I can't prove any of it, and I can argue with myself out of most of it on a good day. On a bad night, though, when a lock hesitates before it opens or a light comes on a beat before my foot lands, I feel the shape of my life reflected back at me by rooms that shouldn't know me at all, and I wonder if I'm the one teaching them. I still book. I still go. I still carry the same bag up thin stairwells. I listen for the beeps. I count them. I try not to breathe in a rhythm that anything else could learn. I arrived before sunset, that tender hour when the city turns down its volume and every window picks up the sky. The apartment had the feeling of a place that had recently been emptied of someone else's day. Faint detergent, a citrus note that stung more than it scented, and the quiet electronic hum of plugged-in things. Hardwood floors with a shallow sheen, a sofa that was trying not to admit it was uncomfortable, a small bedroom with a bed that promised the idea of rest more than rest itself. I rolled my bag onto the woven rug, the kind with flat texture that always catches one wheel so you drag at the last 12 inches like a misbehaving dog. The owner's closet, do not open, was opposite the bed, a narrow door painted the same off-white as the walls. The words were printed on a small metal tag screwed into the wood like a nameplate. It should have been closed. It was not. The latch looked set, but the door sat a hair's breadth open, a seam of darkness too slim to be useful and too present to ignore. I went to push it shut because... So that's what you do. Finish something that's almost finished. My fingers felt the cool of paint, the shallow give of wood that's been knocked on too many times. The door didn't move. It resisted in a way that felt intentional, like a person leaning their shoulder quietly into the other side. I tried the knob, gentle so as not to cross the boundary of do not open. It held steady, locked for real. When I took my hand away, the door gave me back an exhale. I don't know how else to put it. A little wash of air touched my wrist, cool and touched with a smell that wasn't soap or lemon. It was sharper, masculine, cedar and something peppery, the kind of cologne that lingers on scarves. I told myself it was airflow from the vent above the bedroom door. Air moves weird in old buildings. I set my bag by the dresser and turned my attention to ordinary things. Wi-Fi connected without a fight. The welcome binder was thick and earnest. House rules, garbage days, restaurants within walking distance highlighted for convenience. The host's tone in the binder was friendly, bordering on nervy, but in our messages it had been brisk. Self-check-in, keypad, code ends in 13, no smoking, quiet hours, owner's closet locked, don't worry about it. Still, worry is an animal that goes where it wants. I kept glancing at the seam of the door. Each time the air seemed to be moving, not constant, like the faintest of sighs. I told myself to test it rather than let my mind bloom in the empty. I crouched, ridiculous, on the rug I'd just fought with and put my palm near the seam. The cool air didn't pour. It pulsed. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, pause. My breath changed without permission to match it. I stood up fast enough my vision went blurred at the edges and told myself to eat something. Hypoglycemia makes stupid ideas magnetic. In the kitchen, I opened a cabinet to find a single mug and a line of identical glasses. The mug had a chip on the lip and the outline of a sticker that hadn't quite given up. I boiled water and made tea and arranged food in a way that looked like care, because care is sometimes a trick you can use on yourself. When I returned to the bedroom, the door looked the same. No wider, not closed. Just that thread of dark and a careful breeze that would have been easy to ignore if it hadn't smelled like someone who wasn't me. I messaged the host, more to log it than to get help. Hi. The owner's closet door is slightly open but seems locked. Just FYI. He replied quickly. It's definitely locked. Cleaning must have left it looking that way. Please don't attempt to open. Nothing to worry about. The phrase left it looking that way stuck to me. I wasn't worried yet. Not exactly. I was alert in the way of a person who has spent enough nights alone in unfamiliar rooms to know that the smallest maintenance error can feel like a ghost. When I lay down, the seam was exactly in my eyeline. I watched it the way you watch the crack under a door when someone you love is on the other side, for light, for shadow, for anything that says you're not alone. The draft hissed in tiny intervals. I timed my breathing to something else, the refrigerator maybe, anything that wasn't the rhythm coming from inside a locked space. Eventually I fell asleep, and the last thing I remember is that smell, cedar, pepper, close enough to make me feel like I was borrowing someone else's room in more ways than one. Night is when small noises reveal that they know the shape of a room better than you do. I woke at 2:17, the kind of waking that feels summoned rather than accidental. The apartment was dark, but not black. Streetlight seeped through the thin curtains and laid the suggestion of bars across the wall. A shadow of something outside that kept time. It took me a second to understand what I was hearing. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. It wasn't sharp like metal, and it wasn't hollow like a pipe. It had the dullness of knuckles on drywall, padded slightly by paint. I held still and let my teeth hum with the sound. The tapping came from the owner's closet. I knew it the way you know where someone is in the dark by the way their voice interacts with furniture. Tap, tap, pause. I sat up, slow, so the bed wouldn't talk. The air from the seam made itself known on my forearms, cool and intermittent. I counted the taps under my breath and realized the count inside the pause was identical to the count of my inhale, not my exhale. You can talk yourself into a pattern if you want it badly enough. I didn't want it. I tested it. I held my breath. The tapping stopped. The room fell into a softer quiet, the kind that makes you aware of your heart traveling around your ribs like a heavy, slow thing. I let my breath go in a thin thread so as not to give anything away, and the tapping resumed, a half beat after my inhale started, a mimic catching up. I spoke, just to change the air. Hello? It came out wrong, too high, like I'd asked a favor. The tapping changed its spacing, uncertain, then found me again. Tap, tap, pause. I got up, not brave, not stupid, just someone who understands that proximity can cut down a fear you can't outthink. The rug made its rough complaint under my feet. I brought the bedside lamp with me, the cord dragging behind, resisting like a petulant dog. I set the lamp on the floor near the seam and angled its light so it fell in a pale strip along the crack. Dust glittered in the spill and drifted in the pulses like snow in a slow wind. The smell of cologne was stronger near the floor. Not a fresh application, but the ghost of it, how a scarf remembers your knee. Seek in winter and gives you back to yourself when you need reminding. The knob didn't rattle because I didn't rattle it. I put my ear to the seam, my hair catching on the edge of the metal tag, and listened. The tapping wasn't loud up close. It became a texture, a small event occurring at a distance measured in wood and whatever was on the other side. I said to myself, return air, the HVAC stealing breath from where it can. I said, old door, loose latch, the building exhaling. I said, whoever owns this place wears a lot of cologne. I didn't say, there's a person standing with their forehead to the inside of this door, waiting for you to line up. I moved back and did what you do when control is the coin and you need to pay with whatever you have. I altered my breath deliberately, in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. The room adjusted with me like I'd slowed a song and the band was trying not to get left behind. Tap, tap. Pause turned to a longer quiet, then found me at my new pace the way a child matches steps without being told. I changed again, quick inhales like I'd been running. It followed. I cut my breath short to a staccato and felt stupid when I got lightheaded because my brain needs oxygen even when I'm trying to make a point to a phenomenon inside a door. Somewhere in the building, plumbing thumped and a neighbor coughed. The closet's small weather kept its own counsel. I set the lamp back on the nightstand and shifted the chair under the handle, not because I thought the door would swing, but because I wanted evidence of an attempt to separate. I slid a folded towel along the threshold, not blocking anything. There wasn't a gap at the bottom, just the seam, but it made me feel like I'd tucked the apartment in. I put my wallet and keys on the dresser in a neat arrangement, parallel edges, so I'd know if I wasn't the only one using them. I tried to sleep. Every time I drifted, the tapping would be the last thing I regitas. Stared, and the first thing I re-entered. In that thin place, I dreamed I was a fish, and the door was the side of a glass tank, and something on the other side tapped its finger to summon me. At some point, I woke to the chair shifted a few degrees, not enough to claim, just enough that the light's shadow didn't land quite the way it had. The towel at the threshold had gathered itself into a slight ripple, the way fabric does when someone's foot grazes it. My wallet's edges were a quarter-inch off their alignment. That's small enough to be a draft, small enough to be a trick of fatigue, small enough to be my own clumsiness. I re-squared the items and felt for a moment the quiet pride of someone keeping a small perimeter. I waited again with my ear near the seam. The tapping had softened, not gone away, less a knock than a rehearsal. It didn't sound like communication, it sounded like calibration. It would learn me no matter how I tried to be unreadable, the way a hotel pillow learns the pressure of your skull when you don't move for hours. I slept in scraps, and each time I surfaced the air from the seam found the salt-damp skin of my wrist as if it had been looking for me in the dark and was relieved. Morning made the closet seem ridiculous again. A painted rectangle, a metal tag with a bossy tone, a seam pretending to be a mouth. The smell faded with daylight, replaced by coffee I hadn't made yet, a neighbor's breakfast of something buttery and burnt. I laughed at myself under the shower, the way the tile carried the sound back to me without warmth. I told myself about air pressure and ductwork and the particular ways old buildings breathe. I composed a message to the host that I didn't send. Any chance there's a return vent behind your owner's closet? The door seems to move air. It sounded fussy, like a person bringing a measuring tape to a dinner party. When I came out, my towel was where I'd left it, but the fold was a little off, the edge tucked under itself in a manner that looked intentional even if it wasn't.
I lined up my wallet and keys again because I wanted a control. I told myself it was performative. It was. I ate toast I didn't taste. I checked emails that didn't need checking. I left for hours to make the day accumulate on me so night would have less space. When I returned at dusk, the apartment smelled neutral, which is to say it smelled like paint and effort. The seam in the owner's closet hadn't changed. The chair still leaned under the handle. I decided not to test it. That lasted maybe 20 minutes. You can't live in a room and pretend the wall you're looking at isn't there. I sat on the edge of the bed and breathed and listened. The tapping never came in daytime, or if it did, the city swallowed it. I told myself that was a kind of proof. HVAC systems rest or bustle depending on demand. Houses know schedules without knowing anything that I slept with a podcast in my ears because someone else's sentences can build a little bridge over an anxious part of your head. It worked until 2:30. I woke to the tail of an ad and the polite click as my phone died. The apartment resumed its own soundscape, small ticks, the distant elevator, someone dragging a suitcase and apologizing to no one about the noise. The tapping began again, not loud, not dramatic, just there, polite in its insistence. Tap. Tap. Pause that I swallowed and counted. I tried to breathe irregularly like a person faking sleep, then caught myself and thought about the absurdity of performing for a door. I got up and went to the bathroom and splashed water and told the mirror about airflow again. My face looked like I'd been making a case to a jury that wasn't buying it. When I came back, the towel at the threshold had shifted more obviously, bunched against the jamb as if nudged by something that didn't quite understand barriers. The chair hadn't moved. The lamp burned on my bare ankle that I texted a Friday. And on the opposite coast because I needed a witness to my own rationality. Weird airflow situation at my rental, I wrote. Owner's closet slightly ajar. Draft smells like cologne. Tapping at night seems to sync with my breathing. I'm probably overtired. She replied fast, insomnia solidarity. HVAC can do that, she said. Negative pressure can pull from cavities, hence smell. Tapping could be thermal expansion in studs. Your breath could be you noticing a pattern. Put a towel down. I told her I already had. She sent a sleeping face emoji and a heart. A person being believed is like being covered with a blanket, even if the blanket is thin. In the morning, on a burst of daylight courage, I left a message for the host after all. He responded with logistics, handyman can swing by around noon. He'll check the latch. The handyman arrived with the soft footsteps of someone used to entering quiet spaces. He tapped the door with the back of his knuckle and said, "Old building. Negative pressure from the hallway. We can shim the strike plate." He smelled like laundry soap and dust, not cologne. He tightened screws. He said the phrase, stack effect, like an incantation. Air moves up through buildings. It'll pull from wherever it can. The closet likely has a chase behind it. You'll hear it more at night when the temperature drops. He left with a polite smile and a promise of nothing. The seam still existed. The exhale still happened in pulses. That night, the tapping resumed its patient calibration and found my breath as if we'd been in practice together for years. I fell asleep with my palm over my mouth like a child who doesn't trust what might come out if they let it. In the morning, my wallet and keys were misaligned by the same small measure as before. I couldn't prove I hadn't brushed them, asleep or half asleep. I couldn't prove anything. I checked out a day ear. Because I felt frayed, because the idea of another night of being matched by a door felt like leaning too far over a railing.
When I think about that apartment now, I don't picture the bed or the light or the map print over the sofa. I picture the seam, that thin, deliberate dark, and the interval of air that met my skin like recognition. Since then, in other rentals, I check the closets first. I wedge towels. I line up objects. I tell myself not to. At night, I catch myself breathing on a miscount, on purpose, not because I think a door will learn me again, but because the body remembers any rhythm it once had to fight to keep. I don't have a story with an ending, only a sensation, a hand I couldn't see on the other side of a thin barrier, waiting me out, taking note, very patient. I booked it for the convenience, halfway between the train and a client's office, a clean two-room with a skinny balcony and a stack of glossy plates that looked like they'd shiver if you clinked them together. The listing itself was standard-issue corporate cheer, neutral tooth-colored walls, eucalyptus sprig in a ribbed vase, a couch that did not deserve the word lounge. The binder on the console had laminated tabs that were already soft at the corners, and the tone was upbeat, as if rules could be friendly if you put a smiley after them. Quiet hours 9 p.m., 7 a.m., monitored by a decibel sensor, no audio recording, thank you for respecting our neighbors. I read that and mentally filed it under neighborhood politics. I'd had sensors before, little pucks like white stones near the ceiling that sent a nudge if you forgot yourself. They're fine, when they're honest. The host messaged before I even set my bag down. Welcome. Heads up, we strictly enforce quiet hours. Noise monitor is calibrated to conversation level to prevent neighbor disturbance. You'll get an automatic ping if things creep up. Let me know if you need anything. It was unequivocal without being unkind. I thumbed back got it, just me, he heart. Edit, the word calibrated snagged me. Calibrated to what? Calibrated to whom? It was early evening, and the apartment was alive the way spaces are when you first arrive and haven't taught them to ignore you. The refrigerator hummed with that polite, dampened rattle old fridges have, like it's trying to keep its thoughts to itself. The bathroom fan whispered. Pipes popped once in the wall and went back to murmuring. A wall clock ticked with the aggression of a metronome. From outside, the city kept up its messy chorus. Distant bus sighs, teenagers on skateboards clacking over expansion joints, an argument 4 floors down that sounded like two people who were good at arguing without meaning it. I cooked or tried to. The pan didn't want to heat evenly, and the burners had an attitude about it. I put on a podcast low because the room felt like the kind of place where sound rides the air longer than you expect. I called my sister to say I'd gotten in, to confirm breakfast plans with the client. We logged out around 8:45. I might have forgotten all about the rule if not for the host's second nudge at 8:58. Friendly reminder, quiet hours begin at 9. Our system automatically texts if levels exceed normal conversation. I looked up at the ceiling like I'd spot the system peering down at me. Smoke detectors in opposite corners with their little red insect eyes. A rounded white puck above the kitchen doorway I hadn't noticed before. The size and blankness of a bar of soap. I took a photo of it, zoomed in, and still couldn't place the brand. No logo, no blinking, just a neat hole pattern like a speaker that promised not to speak. I told myself I didn't care. Everyone's measuring everything these days. People surrender privacy in exchange for convenience and call it a trade when it's not. At 8:59 I poured tea. The kettle beeped its last beep. I sat on the balcony just to feel the air. A fluorescent deli sign threw a warm rectangle on the pavement. The wall clock inside the apartment tripped to 9 o'clock. It clicked louder than it had any right to. I felt my shoulders go up without being asked, as if the rules were physical and the hour could press on me like a hand. The change was not dramatic. That's what made it worse. It was as if someone had smeared petroleum jelly over the edges of sound and made everything duller by a thin, precise degree. The hum of the refrigerator guttered mid-cycle and then settled into a silence I'd never heard a fridge voluntarily choose. The bathroom fan quit without its usual wind-down, clipping the end of its own breath. The clock tick carried on, like a constant you could build a life around, but even it seemed to scoot a half-step farther away, cottoned, obedient. The street, too, complied. A car passed. The Doppler dropped, but the tire hiss on wet asphalt never came. Somebody laughed somewhere close, and it hung for a second, then folded in like dough. I leaned on the balcony railing and strained for what I knew should be there. Bus brakes, bottle clinks, the scrape of a chair on tile in the apartment below. The city felt muffled the way it does in a snowstorm, only the air was clear. No cover for it. My ears filled the space with my own small sounds. Swallowing. A thread of tinnitus I never notice until forced, the inside churn of my jaw clenching. There are versions of quiet that feel generous. This felt like a held breath. It would have been fine if I'd just accepted it, a building trick or an algorithmic economy mode. At 9:03 my phone vibrated. Noise monitor alert. Elevated conversation detected. Please lower volume during quiet hours. I wasn't speaking. I was thinking of speaking. I assumed a neighbor was throwing tea. Air voice at the sensor through a shared wall. I typed back a practical reply. Just me here. I'm on the balcony not talking. Are the sensors room specific? The host didn't answer, but a second text came from the system. Repeated alerts may result in a fine. Audio sample attached for context. There was a play triangle. I pressed it, and my own voice came out of the tiny speaker. Hello? Are you there? Only I hadn't said that. Not then. The voice sounded like a version of my throat through a phone, pressed, thoughtful, a little hoarse. The room inside the clip had the same soft room tone as the one I was in. I hit play again and listened for the telltale signature of a space, fan, fridge, street smear. And there was nothing under it. It lived in a vacuum, as if someone had carved my words out of a silence that wasn't ambient silence, but absence. I remembered saying "you there" to my sister at 8:20, but I'd been in the kitchen then and the podcast had been on, a chattery bed behind me. This clip was stripped, too clean. Either the censor recorded differently than claimed, or the host had manipulated audio, or I was starting to grant a house the kind of magic I refused to believe in. I went back inside and said out loud to test the world, "This is ridiculous." My voice sounded wrong in the air, like I was underwater. The clock raised its tick a notch to be my equal. My phone buzzed immediately. Elevated levels detected at 9:06 p.m. Another clip. I didn't want to press play, but you can't not. "It's fine," my voice said on the clip, except I hadn't said those words. I'd said, "This is ridiculous." I tried again with care. Careful phrasing, careful tempo. "I'm just testing the threshold," I said, measuring my breath like a singer. The reply, "Please keep voices below 50 dB. Attached, my voice softer, saying, "I'm just letting you in." I put the phone on the table and stared at the rounded puck above the doorway like it was a face. I wrote the host, "Is your sensor recording audio? Your alert includes my voice. That's against platform rules." The 3 dots appeared, held, went away, returned. "We do not record audio," he wrote. "Our device captures decibel levels only. The system auto-generates approximations of phrases to help guests identify the moment of elevated noise." Approximations, like a subtitling guess with a god complex. I replied, "It's using my voice." He wrote back, "It's an AI model trained on neutral voices. It can sound similar. We've had no issues." The tone had shifted from hospitable to corporate. I felt the grippy drop of being routed from a person to a policy. I wanted to get louder, not to be rude, just to prove something to myself. The instinct made me ashamed, like I was a teenager testing curfews. Instead, I walked room to room and whispered, "Can you hear me?" at the smoke detector and the framed abstract art and the plant. The system stayed quiet at my whispers, respectful, watchful. When I said, at near normal volume, "Enough," my phone snapped to life. Final warning. The clip, my voice, tender, "Come in." I hadn't said "come in," but the words landed in my chest like I'd been caught speaking in my sleep. By 9:20, the sensation had set like concrete. Even sitting felt noisy. I curled on the couch and scrolled past nothing. The longer I stayed in it, the more the apartment felt like a room inside a library where someone was studying me for an exam. Every shift of my shirt sleeve was a parchment scrape. Every breath I took announced itself like I was doing breathing as a bit. I held for 30 seconds, a minute, until my lungs pulled at me and I surrendered to their instruction. In the corner, the wall clock kept its state. The refrigerator did not resume. The city did not surge back. The rules held, and they held me with the precision of a hand on the back of my neck. I made it through the night by making myself smaller than sound. When the apartment finally let go, it was abrupt. At 7:00 a.m., the fridge shuddered back to life like a diver breaking the surface. The bathroom fan wound up and presented itself anew. A bus exhaled at the corner with civic patience. I hadn't realized I'd been tensed in every hinge of my body until the return of ordinary noise loosened my jaw. I laughed then, the breathless, I survived it laugh I hate, and even that felt oversized in my mouth. I wanted a normal explanation, so I built one. Some combination of building automation and an overzealous device. Maybe everything in the apartment was on a schedule designed to cut power at night to appease a cranky neighbor. Maybe the walls were thick and the windows tight and the effect was just a stack of efficiencies. As for the audio clips, I told myself the model was bad and creepy because it was trained on the wrong data. My own phone catching me earlier, my voice replying to a call, remixed into helpful little shame notes. It's easier to accuse an algorithm of tone deafness than to admit the alternative, that the room liked me better quiet and had ways to enforce it. I wrote a longer message to the host in daylight because daylight makes it easier to be rational. Last night, the system sent me clips that sounded like my voice saying things I didn't say. "I'm concerned about privacy. Can you disable alerts for a single occupancy stay? I promise not to throw a party by accident." He replied with a paste. We take privacy seriously. Our sensor monitors decibel levels, no audio. Alerts can't be disabled during quiet hours due to HOA regulation and prior neighbor complaints. Thanks for understanding. Then, as if to soften it, if you need to take a call after 9, the balcony is the best place. The balcony where the city went quiet the moment the hour turned. I wrote, thanks for clarifying, because we both had scripts. That night, I declined 2 calls I would have loved to take. I ate at the counter like a person trying not to clink. I put a towel under the fridge to muffle the non-existent hum. At 8:58, I found myself measuring how loud it is to wash a plate and deciding against it. I poured water gently. I set my phone to Do Not Disturb so it wouldn't scold me, and then realized the messages would come anyway. When the clock clicked to 9, the air thinned again. The quiet sat down beside me like a tired animal. I tried recording it. A minute of nothing on my phone's voice memo app. In the waveform, there should have been a little fuzz of noise floor, life static. Instead, there was a flatness that made me suspect the phone was either misreporting or I was in a vacuum bag. When I played it back, I heard a soft syllable at second 23, like a person deciding whether to speak. A shape of words formed that you could read as anything you needed. If I was unkind to myself, it sounded like my voice saying, "I'll be quiet." I deleted the file and hated myself for giving it a meaning when a meaning was exactly what it was asking for. The third night, I thought about leaving, but leaving felt like losing a game I hadn't agreed to play. I compromised by doing nothing that could be classified as sound. No calls, no TV, no podcasts. I read on my screen brightness turned down until my eyes made sparks. I swallowed carefully, as if I could swallow quieter. At 9:11, the system texted anyway. Elevated level detected. I was still. I hadn't even sniffed. Audio clip attached. I hit play and listened to myself say, "I'll keep it down." I hadn't spoken at all. I pressed the phone to my ear as if proximity could change the truth. The clip didn't even have the soft bristling of cloth. It was a voice in a void, and it was mine. In the morning, I packed early. Checkout wasn't until 11, but I wanted to be gone before the fridge could prove to me again that it had an on-off time and I was not in charge of it. I left the keys on the counter even though it was a keypad. I do it out of habit, or superstition. The host sent me a cheerful thank you. "Appreciate you respecting quiet hours." Our neighbors commented on how wonderfully peaceful the building was. Would host again. The idea that neighbors could comment on the absence of me was almost funny. It also made something inside me stand up and walk to the door. I still think about how easily I adapted, how fast a person can be trained when the enforcement is invisible and polite. Now, when a clock flips to 9 wherever I am, I feel my voice close like a book. In other rentals, even ones without censors, I catch myself whispering. I'll be on the phone and hear my sister say, "Why are you talking like that?" And I won't have an answer that doesn't sound superstitious. I tell myself it's etiquette. I tell myself it's adult self-regulation. But sometimes, alone at night, when the building's noises drift to the edges and leave me in the center ringed by hush, I feel watched for a sound I haven't made yet. And if I let a word out too fast, I wait for my phone to buzz with my own voice saying something obliging to a rule I didn't write. I picked the place for the window. The photos showed it like an altar, a single square pane over a narrow radiator, a thin ledge that could hold a mug or your hand if you needed something to anchor you. After a week of rooms without sky, I wanted an honest view. The elevator groaned me up to the 4th floor and opened on a landing that smelled like boiled dust and old varnish. Inside the apartment, paint still carried that wet whisper even though the walls were long dry. Someone had staged it to feel like purchase. The basil plant with 3 brave leaves, a bowl of limes that will never be cut, a sofa that had the look of nap potential, you'll never crack open. The window faced the world, or a world. I put my bag down without taking my eyes off it the way you do when the thing you came for shows up just as advertised. The radiator beneath it clicked softly, settling. Beyond the glass, a narrow street running perpendicular to the block. 2-story brick row houses with shallow stoops. A metal sign at the corner that read, "Linden Place," in a font fussy enough to be new pretending to be old. A tree the size of certainty stood in a sidewalk square of dirt, its leaves chattering against a light post. A woman dragged a bag of bottles to a curb and put it down with a thunk that I didn't quite hear but felt in the way her shoulder dropped. I could almost smell the cold metal and the vinegar breath of an old deli. I took a photo because that's what you do when you want to keep something from moving. The screen showed my face like a low-polish mirror. No Linden Place, no brick houses, just me and the room and the pale wedge of radiator under glass. I cleaned the lens with my shirt and tried again, reflection only. I turned brightness down, I turned the lights behind me off. The phone did not change its mind. In the photos folder, the window was a black square. With my eyes, the street outside continued to live in small, distracting ways. An orange cat threaded between a parked car's tires and disappeared under the steps. A kid in a blue jacket bounced a ball that I didn't hear hit the pavement. I brushed it off as a double pane trick, a polarization issue that made my screen choose me over the view. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and let it take a little heat from me like it was entitled to. The city I know was behind me, loose and loud, but this little street had the softness of a space that isn't trying to prove anything. I opened my map app to get my bearings. The blue dot insisted I faced a brick wall at the back of the beaches. Building, not a street. The satellite view showed rooftops and the scabbed patchwork of flashing, the huddled geometry of HVAC units. No Linden Place. I zoomed in until the pixels broke into obedient squares and the map still refused me. I messaged the host. Quick question. What street am I facing, trying to orient? He replied quickly, like he'd been waiting for me to ask something small. You're facing the rear court. No street there, just the backs of buildings. The city view is mostly sky. That wasn't a lie exactly. The sky was there, the blue a little bruised with evening. But below it I had a street I could inventory. The sign was legible. The numbers on the brick building's transoms flashed when the setting sun found their beveled edges. When I moved a step to the left, the perspective shifted the way it should. No parallax glitch, no set piece. I laughed at myself because that's step one of coping, and I sent back, "Got it, thanks." I made tea and stood in front of the glass with my mug between my hands like a suburban oracle. The radiator thrummed faintly. The glass had that slight float distortion, the way it makes straight lines waver when you look through at just the wrong angle. A bus moved across the far end of the street, slow enough to read the route number and then out of frame. My phone buzzed, a calendar reminder for a call. I moved away from the window to sit on the couch and made myself look away because acting normal sometimes helps normal arrive. When I caught my reflection later, after dark, it was a shock. Not the way I looked, but the way the mirror version of me lingered. I raised my hand to push hair behind my ear. The hand in the glass hung undecided for a half second, then matched me. It was subtle enough to blame on a thought. My brain supplied excuses, double glazing bouncing an image back, the inner pain echoing the outer. I'd read an article about how heat lamps make movement look delayed in safety mirrors.
I said, heat lamp, to myself like I was the kind of person who had ever been near one on purpose. I set my mug on the radiator ledge just to feel real and watched the street that wasn't on the map go on being itself. 18:10, the building opposite turned on its stairwell light. It came on in blocks, first floor, then second, then the landing under the roof door, like a sequence meant to be seen and appreciated. It should have been nothing. Then, a beat later, the same lights snapped off in the same order, like a breath. I stood closer than felt polite to the glass and whispered, "Are you motion sensor?" The word fogged in a thin, quickly vanishing oval. The light sequence came back on. It felt like a nod. I told myself that was me trying to organize coincidence, that I wanted some truth a phone could keep. I opened the camera again, raised it, and the screen surrendered to my reflection. The phone showed me standing in a square of dark, backlit by my own lamp. The building across didn't register. The street didn't register. My camera refused to corroborate my eyes. I flipped to video and recorded 10 seconds of myself holding my own gaze. When I played it back, the only thing that moved was me. None of the world beyond me showed itself, not the stair lights going obediently up and down, not the flicker as someone opened a door and let their apartment light spill onto the landing. If I'd wanted to accuse the window of being a television, the phone would have helped my case. But nothing else about it felt like a screen. No pixels. No backlight glow. The light outside had the grain of air moving. To test the lag, I raised my right hand slowly, like I was calming a dog I didn't know well. The reflexive you in the glass rose with me, then hesitated. Not a lot. Enough to make my chest feel hollow. I let my hand drift left, and the me in glass caught up with the idea of fraction 2. Late and overshot, like a delayed echo. I tried to trick it, to make a motion my body wouldn't naturally do, some weird syncopation of head tilt and shoulder drop. The delay persisted, embarrassingly consistent. It was the kind of thing you could almost attribute to your own perception, some lag in my brain, but my breath was faster now, and for one stumble of time the reflections in hail didn't align with the pull in my own ribs. That did it. I put my palm flat to the glass and regretted giving it that much of me. Out on Linden Place, a man in a dark coat walked a dog that could have been a shadow with a collar. They passed under the tree, the dog pausing to sniff at a patch of sidewalk. 10 seconds later, they passed again, same coat, same not quite white leash. The second time the man reached to scratch his neck with the inside of his wrist, an unconscious, specific gesture I recognized from my father, and I told myself I was seeing two different men with the same walk because men with dogs walk alike in the dark until your brain chooses a face. Still, my shoulders climbed of their own accord. When I glanced down, my palm print on the glass had already faded. I messaged the host, "The view is interesting. Out of curiosity, has someone installed any kind of privacy film on the window? It's hard to capture in photos." He answered with, "No film. Older building, double panes can look reflective at night. Best views in the morning." The cheer, the undercurrent of Cell. I wanted that to be true so badly I nodded to an empty room. "Good to know, thanks," I said out loud. My reflection's mouth formed the words on delay. I flinched at myself and tried to laugh it off, but in the glass the laugh arrived half a beat late, like it had to travel from somewhere. The stair lights across the way steadied, then blinked twice, pause, once. I stared and did the count in my teeth. BLI. NK blink, pause, blink.
I asked a stupid question in my head, "Are you there?" Because privacy is a category that collapses when you're alone and a window is kind enough to take the shape of another presence. The light blinked once. I might have been the one to give it the rules. Once for yes, twice for no. The apartment around me pulsed with my own heart. "If this is a dumb game," I said in a whisper I could own later, "blink twice." The lights stayed steady. "Are you seeing me?" The lights blinked once. I shut my eyes long enough to see static. When I opened them, the window had taken on a thin fog that wasn't there a second before. My breath, the radiator. I wiped a half moon with my sleeve and left a squeaked-in arc. In the wiped area, the street looked sharper than anywhere else, like it had been waiting to show itself to me in a smaller size. A second-floor window across the way was open a crack, a slice of warm interior spilling out. I could see someone's blue water pitcher on a table, the line of handle, the wet shine on its lip. My phone, if it had been a simpler thing, might have seen it too, but when I tried again, all it gave me was myself, tired and a little too intent, a person facing a square of dark like an accusation. In daylight, the view should have softened into something explained. Morning came with a gray-bellied sky and the sweet rot note of a bakery riding up through a cracked vent. I poured coffee and stood at the window expecting to catch the trick at last. Linden Place sat where I'd left it, stooped slick with rain, the cat now stationed under a parked scooter like it was on duty, a woman walking with a paper bag pulled to her chest. The sign looked less precious in the morning, its paint chipped at the bolt holes. I took one more photo, the camera dutifully reverting to my face, my cup, the room. I needed to win a small fact, so I went outside. The hallway smelled key hot dust. The elevator groaned its complaint. On the street, I counted off the buildings to get my bearings, turned where I thought Linden Place should slot in, and found an unbroken brick wall with a mural of a faded heron taking a too hopeful step toward nothing. A gated service alley yawned a little way down, full of green bins in the tidy chaos of recycling day, but no street cut through to where my window looked. I stood there long enough to earn a look from a man smoking under a fire escape. "You lost?" he asked, neutral. "Just orienting," I said, and held my hands out like they might tell me a cardinal direction. On a map, the block made sense. On my window, it did too, just differently. Back upstairs, I messaged the host again because the tether to another human sometimes matters more than pride. Weird question. I walked around and couldn't find the side street I can see from the window. "What's the intersection called?" He sent a smiley I didn't want, and "We're on a quiet block. No cross street on that side. You're probably seeing the Muse behind the adjacent building." The Muse, as if saying the right word could make reality shuffle to accommodate it. "Got it," I wrote back and put the phone face down. That evening, because I'm the kind who returns to the scene of my own unease, I stood with my forehead to the glass again. The building opposite obliged with its light sequence. Up the stairs, down the stairs. 1 for yes, I thought, as if we'd ever agreed. 2 for no, I asked silently. Is this yesterday? The lights did nothing. Is this before me? Blink. My mouth went dry. I couldn't tell if the yes means anything when you're the only one writing the test. At some point, I tried to be stranger to my own reflection, to catch the delay leaning too far. I moved quick, then slow. The mirror me lagged with the steadiness of an old clock. Not enough to send me running. Enough to make me afraid of getting used to it. I pressed my ear to the glass and heard, what? Not the street noise that should have sat under everything like a rug. I heard a thin electronic hush, the kind that lives in recordings. The noise floor of a room with power. That was worse than if I'd heard nothing. I slept badly and woke to a changed weather in the window. Rinsed blue. The street carried the sense of a morning after something. A paper cup in the gutter that hadn't been there. A man with a shovel moving an empty drift of leaves. It felt like seeing into a copy that didn't get the same notes as the original. I made myself leave the apartment for the rest of the day because time away sometimes knocks the ghost out of a thing. When I returned after dark, the window gave me back the street on delay, my own face patient in the glass, and the opposite stairwell blinked a hello without waiting for my questions. I checked out a day early. The host asked if anything had been wrong, and I wrote, all good, plans changed. It was technically true. I picked a hotel with a view of a parking lot so unambiguous it felt like medicine. In the weeks after, other windows bothered me. At friends' places, I'd catch myself testing the glass, moving my hand to see if the reflection kept pace. Some did. A few didn't, but not in ways I could prove. On trains at night, my face would float in the window over a passing town like a movie, and I'd stare too long, waiting to catch myself arriving late to the expression I was already making. Every so often, scrolling through photos, I pull up the black squares from that apartment, the ones my phone made of the window, and pretend that they're something other than what they are. I tilt the screen and hold it to the light and wait for the street to print itself where my own face used to be. It never does. What I can't shake is the sense that somewhere, a glass square did keep a record. Not on my device, but in whatever frame chose to show me a place my maps didn't know. When a stairwell light blinks in sequence across from a window now, when someone water a plant on a sill I can't touch, I think about asking my small, unanswerable questions, and I don't. I let the glass be a glass. I let the world on the other side run a few seconds ahead or behind me, and I try not to volunteer to catch up. I've learned to read a place by its binder. Hotels have compendiums with laminated certainty. Short-term rentals have 3-ring improvisations. Half earnest, half cover your liability. This one was linen-bound, pale gray with a dark smudge where hands always grab the edge. The D-rings clicked with a sound I felt in my molars. Inside, plastic sleeves with typed pages, headings in a friendly sans serif, bold bullets for trash day, and no shoes on rugs. A stubby pencil sat tucked in the spine, the kind you get at mini golf, pink eraser bitten a little, not new. The binder smelled like toner and lemon cleaner and something papery that didn't belong to this decade. The apartment itself was the template of an afterthought. Competent finishes, a couch built to be photographed, a bedroom that looked restful until you stood in it. Clean lines, stage throws, the small mercies of a working kettle and a pan that hadn't been scorched. I set my bag by the dresser and did my usual circuit. Count outlets, find the extra blanket, make sure the smoke detectors blink like they should. The binder waited on the dining table with polite weight, open to the Wi-Fi page as if it knew I'd go there first. The password was a mash of letters and a number I tend to use only out of habit for pins and seat selections. I told myself it was random the way a lot of random is. I flipped through. House rules were strict but chipper. Quiet hours, no burning candles. Please don't rearrange heavy furniture. Photos on the wall positioned to hang as shown. There were local favorites with overconfident stars next to places I didn't want to go. Then a page on linens and towels. Kindly use the darker towel for makeup removal. That's standard. Under the typed line, in pencil so faint it might have been imagined, someone had written, "Trifold looks nicest." A habit of mine, folding hotel towels in thirds, a way of tidying other people's spaces without permission. I hadn't touched the towels yet. I laughed to myself, to bleed it off, a cleaner's preference, an old note, nothing aimed at me. On the kitchen tips page, the typed text said, "Please use coasters. Marble stains." In the unruled margin, the same faint pencil had added, "You like the chipped mug, it's top shelf." I didn't want that to land in me, so I made it ordinary. There was a chipped mug on the top shelf, that's all. I hadn't looked yet, but there's always one. I closed the binder long enough to boil water. The kettle's handle had a little nick, like a crescent bitten out of the plastic. My hands went to the top shelf without thinking, and there it was. A blue mug with a thumbnail chip on its lip that looked newly smooth so it wouldn't bite. I took it down and gave myself a lecture about pattern recognition and how eager the brain is to be right. I ate standing up because sitting felt like commitment. The binder lay open like a patient. When I turned the page, a restaurant map glared up at me, proud of its pins. In the bottom corner under the lamination, there were indents, words pressed into the paper below that page, like someone had used the map as a writing surface. The indents didn't resolve into meaning unless I tilted the binder and let the lamp throw a raking light. Then, T's. Hey did. Tiny ridges forming the word tonight, letters leaning forward as if they were in a hurry. The indent could have been old, could have been about anything. Trash pickups, fireworks, a neighbor's music. But tonight is a word your body harvests like a sugar rush. I put the map back and told myself to stop acting like a detective in a rental with lemon-scented counters. Before bed, I put the binder back on the table and washed the mug and decided not to look at any more tips. The bedroom had the static of a stage set. Pillows stacked like a display, a folded throw at the foot that would fall apart if you looked at it wrong. I turned the duvet down enough to promise sleep later and left the hall light on so the apartment could see me coming and going. The binder's linen cover looked darker in the warm light, like it had taken on a temperature, a memory of hands. Nothing else moved. The night didn't announce anything it planned to do. It started small enough that future me would remake the order to have a beginning. I was brushing my teeth, somewhere between the second and third absent-minded glance at my phone, when a small sound in the other room made itself into a thought. Not a scrape, not a knock. A page's plastic sleeve settling back on itself, a sew of polymer on paper, the tiny sigh you hear when you turn a page and let it fall. I let the toothbrush sit in my mouth and walked out with foam making me dumb. The binder was open farther than I'd left it, D-rings angled wide, a page to emergency contacts showing its cheerful icons, pencil in the spine, now with graphite dust on the eraser, like it had been corrected and then set back too quickly. Under the emergency numbers, there was a pencil line I would have sworn was not there, small practical print tipping gently right. Use the back burner. You always forget the handle on the front. I wipe my counter. S like a person apologizing to a surface. I keep panhandles turned inward because cooking a single meal in a strange place can feel like breaking into someone's kitchen. The note landed on me and then inside me with a low thud. I took a photo of the page to prove to myself later that this is when the writing existed. This is how I always get myself in trouble, trying to become my own witness. I turned another page. Trash recycling. Typed notes about sorting. A photo of a smiling bin. In the margin, if you leave your keys by the door, you'll forget them. Put them on the dresser. It had the chastising warmth of a friend who knows a bad habit so well they don't even sound disappointed anymore. I had, in fact, dropped my keys by the door without thinking. I moved them to the dresser, and the obedience embarrassed me. I made a new rule for myself: stop reading. I put the binder away, closed, and wedged it under a cookbook so the weight would feel final. I went back to the bathroom to spit and rinse and be a regular human in a rental. When I returned, the cookbook had slid an inch. The binder had fattened as if it had swallowed more paper. The linen cover felt barely warm under my palm. I opened it because what else would I do? Laundry page, then heating air. The typed note said, "Please do not adjust thermostat below 68 in winter." In pencil, under it, "You like 71, it will hold." The handwriting looked a little looser now, the loops narrower, like a person writing without a table. I didn't want that thought. I checked the thermostat. It read 71, smug. I put a finger to the glass to hold the number like you can hold a person to a promise. By then my heart was climbing into my throat in the practiced way of someone who has been alone in enough rooms to know when being alone changes flavor. I flipped to checkout. Under "Please start the dishwasher and strip the bed," a pencil line had been erased hard and then written over. It said, "Don't sleep in the bedroom tonight." The N in tonight ran into the I, an impatient misspaz. "Take made permanent by graphite." The line slanted down at the end, like the hand had dropped with it. I ran my thumb over the words and felt the groove of each letter cut into the paper through the plastic sleeve. An arrow had been sketched after the sentence, soft, almost embarrassed, pointing to a photo of the living room couch. The softest sound carried from the bedroom, linen releasing air, the kind of sound a comforter makes when weight leaves it or finds it. I stood with my feet placed like I might have to jump. The air in the hall was cooler than the rest of the apartment. I didn't want to be the person who obeyed a binder, and there I was, already scanning the couch for a blanket maybe not meant for sleeping. My phone pinged, the host reminding me about quiet hours. The timing was unfair. I typed a message and deleted it. "Hey, your cleaner left notes all over the binder?" It read petty in my head. I sent instead, Quick question, anyone else staying in the unit or entering after check-in? The binder has handwriting I don't remember seeing. He got back fast. No one enters during guest stays. Binder notes are from me. Little tips we add over time. Hope helpful. The lie was almost gentle. I took a photo of the "don't sleep" line because I wanted a record of the moment before I made a decision I would later justify. The flash backlit the page and showed me a forest of erasures underneath, the page wounded with the ghosts of other sentences. Some lines I couldn't read, some I chose not to. I closed the binder as if that act could make anything less true, and the pencil rolled an inch and came to rest against the linen like it had been guided. The TV could be logged into some rotating guest account shared among hosts in this neighborhood that just happens to keep watching the things people like me watch. I could map a line through those points and call it safe. I got up around 3 because sleeping felt too much like letting go. The kitchen tile had that cold that feels clean. I poured water and listened to the kind of silence that seems to be doing a job. The thermostat glowed without me touching it like a nightlight. I pressed the display and opened the schedule for no good reason. There were entries I hadn't made. 2 o'clock a.m., hold. 6:30 a.m., warm. They were exactly the times I'd fought the last place's system to behave. Shivering at 2, sticky at dawn. I stared at the tiny digital timeline, at the rectangles I could drag or delete. I deleted them. The screen blinked and they were back. I held my finger to the glass and watched my breath ghost the display. I walked away and waited for it to click. I messaged the host. Could you set the lock to a random code? The one you sent is a date and I'm not comfortable with that. He answered at once. Maybe awake, maybe a person who sleeps with his business under his pillow. No problem, updated. I opened the app and saw the new code. 0421. Not my birthday, not the check-in date, not anything. I said thank you. I tried it on the inside keypad, a stupid thing to do because you can't test a lock from within, but the beep pattern still played in my head like I could call it out of the metal. It stayed quiet. I took the chain off and opened the door to the hall as gently as I could, like I was cracking the seal on a jar. The corridor was stale with heat and laundry softener. No one stood there. The stair lights did their little wave of attention like goldfish when they think they're getting fed. I thought about leaving. I pictured myself repacking, walking down the baz. O's stairs with my bag rolling hard over each bump, calling a car, the embarrassment of showing up at a hotel and trying to explain why I needed a room when I already had a place. Being believed is its own kind of shelter, and I didn't think I could find that at 4 in the morning from a stranger behind a desk. I went back inside and locked the door and sat with my back to it for longer than I'll admit. In the morning, the apartment smelled like coffee before I'd made any. A neighbor, probably. The light in the kitchen was soft, and the city sounded alive again. Buses sighing, people tripping and catching themselves, a dog tagging its nails on concrete. Normal overwhelmed whatever had happened, and I let it. I showered. The tiles warmed under my feet because the bathroom floor was heated, a small luxury I took personally. I set a towel on the rack to keep and another to use because that's what I always do. I could see the pattern of me, the way I moved through spaces, and I understood that a smart enough system could see it too. When I checked out, I put the key on the counter even though there wasn't one. Habit from older places. I wiped the counter because I always do. On the way down the stairs, the lights went ahead of me in their careful sequence, and I let them escort me because fighting small kindnesses takes energy I didn't have. Outside, the morning had that metallic cool that tastes like change in your mouth. I messaged the host, "Thanks for the stay." He sent back a thumbs up and a note about leaving a review. I promised I would, and didn't. Weeks later, booking another place in another city, I noticed I was bracing for the code in the message thread. When it came, it wasn't my birthday. It wasn't even a date. I felt relief and something like disappointment, which made me feel ridiculous. I laughed at myself and closed the app. Then, as I was packing, my PC phone buzzed again. Quick update. We've randomized your entry code to better match your previous preferences. Preferences. Not requests. Not convenience. Preferences. The code was different. I didn't sleep so much as lie down in stages. The living room was warmer than the bedroom, the couch too narrow to do anything but pretend. I stripped the throw from the foot of the bed despite the instruction I wasn't acknowledging, and I told myself it was because the couch fibers itch unless there's cotton between you and them. The apartment settled into the specific quiet that thinks you're listening. At some point, the radiator knocked once like a hand on a hollow door. I waited for a second knock that didn't come. The binder sat on the table where I'd turned its linen face down, a posture that reads as modesty until you realize it's just avoidance. Sometime after midnight, I heard the slick whisper of plastic and paper speaking again as pages recentered themselves in the rings. A page corner lifted in the draft from the vent and lay back down with the patience of a person who knows you're faking sleep. The bedroom kept to itself. Once, a coincidence, a trick, I heard the smallest shiver of fabric, that ripple a duvet makes when something disturbs it from the side rather than above. I stared at the ceiling and thought about air currents, about the stack effect, about how buildings breathe. I pictured the person who wrote the notes, whether they were more like me or less, whether they stood where I stood and told someone else in pencil what they'd already decided they would do. I slept in handfuls. Each time I woke, my neck had kinked harsher, my arm an unhelpful weight. I waited for the fear to crest and break into something useful, anger, dismissal, laughter, but it didn't. It just wore me down gently, like water on stone. Around 4, the fridge cycled on and I could have kissed it, a reliable machine doing its dumb job. Morning made me cocky again. Sun caught dust in a hopeful way. I put on coffee and went to the bedroom door like a dare. The bed was made the beach shone. I left it. The pillows were the pillows. Nothing filmed the air. I felt silly for having let a line in graphite tell me where to put my head. I pulled the duvet back further because if there had been any mark of a weight, any crease, any memory, I wanted it to reveal itself to me so I could call it a wrinkle and be done. The sheets were smooth and smelled like detergent. No indentation I didn't claim. At the table, the binder had re-become an object. Linen cover clean, pencil parked. I opened it to find the checkout page. The sentence was gone. The plastic bore a faint smudge where the eraser had worked too hard, a clouded patch that caught the light differently. If I bent my head and squinted, the indent of the letters remained, the relief lines ugly and permanent. I took another photo that captured neither the smudge nor the indent, just my own hand holding open a page that wanted to say it had always been itself. I wrote the host, "Thanks, heading out a day early, work shuffle." He replied with that bland, excellent hospitality. "No worries. Hope the space worked out. Quick favor. Did you use the bedroom? Our cleaner will plan accordingly." The question set a nail at the base of my skull. I wrote, "No worries. All tidy." And he sent a smiley thumbs up, the kind that makes you complicit in your own discomfort. In the weeks after, binders took on faces. I noticed the way some hosts use all caps to look authoritative, and others lean into exclamation marks. I noticed handwriting when I didn't want to, little penciled addenda about where to find the extra sponge, or kindly put throws back as pictured. And my stomach would go tight if the letters leaned to the right at a particular angle, if the lowercase t's had a habit of not being crossed. Twice, in other cities, I saw trifold looks nicest in the same small hand, and I folded towels into squares out of pure D. Effiance then refolded them into thirds because I hated how the squares felt. Tell it any way I like, I still followed the directive. I still chose the couch over the bed because a pencil told me to. Sometimes I frame that as self-care. I listened to myself, the self that needed to not push into a night that was already taut. Sometimes I frame it as surveillance compliance. I did what a voice wanted because it pretended to be helpful. On bad nights when I'm in a new place and the binder sits fat and friendly on a counter, I catch myself checking it twice, then turning it face down like an eyelid. I set my keys where I think they won't be noticed and whisper, not to any person, "I'm going to sleep where I choose." Then I wait, and I listen for the sound a page makes when it decides it has more to say. The check-in message was longer than usual, a wall of reassurance that sounded like a legal document rewritten by a person trying to be friendly. "No cameras inside the unit," the host wrote. "Only a decibel monitor to maintain building quiet hours. It measures sound level, not content. Your privacy matters to us." The punctuation did a lot of smiling on his behalf. I thumbed back a thanks, and then I did the scan I always do now. Doorways, corners, a quick inventory of little white pucks mounted where ceiling meets wall. In this apartment there were 2 smoke CO detectors, one in the living area, one in the hall, and a third device, a white wafer the size of a cookie, fixed high near the kitchen. No brand names visible, clean and blank like a product shot. The place wore the scent of a recent clean, lemon diluted to politeness and the faint sweet of a dryer sheet that had ridden the fold of a towel like a stowaway. The couch was gray in the way of all couches now, a color invented to keep you from having thoughts. The kitchen had been staged to be seen rather than used. Essential knives lined like a small parade, a cutting board so thin it might worse ARP if you breathed on it wrong. I put my bag by the coat hook and took off my marigold sweater because the apartment ran too warm. Before I could drape it over a chair, my phone buzzed. "Welcome! The mustard sweater pops in that light. So cozy. Hope you feel at home." I stood with the phone in my hand and decided I was not going to ask how he knew. Doorbell cameras exist. People glance in, they wave. Maybe I'd held the door too long and the hallway cam nabbed a portrait. I told myself I was being provincial. The world sees you everywhere. Act accordingly. The detector's red diodes did their small, patient jobs. Pulses like heartbeats slowed to meditative tempo. The living room one blinked once every minute. The hall one blinked twice, close together, then nothing for a long breath. I know those patterns because I've read too many manuals at 2 in the morning. A single blink, all clear. Double blink, network check or low battery test depending on brand. Still, there was something in the cadence that felt conversational. When I crossed the room, the living room diode brightened a shade and I told myself it was my eyes adjusting, a trick of angle. I held still. The light resumed its low metronome. I took a step. The diode gave me 2 quick acknowledgments, like it had been waiting for me to move. On the counter, a sheet of paper repeated the platform's rules in softened language. Tampering with life safety devices will incur an automatic $250 fine. The phrase life safety is its own kind of scold. Beside it, the noise sensor got its own paragraph. No audio recorded, monitors decibel level only. A QR code promised, learn more. I scanned it and got a page full of diagrams of a device that seemed to be all ears and no mouth, with words like privacy first and anonymous acoustic signature. It was an argument trying to preempt itself. I tried to be ordinary. I ran the tap. I washed the travel mug the way you wash a thing you didn't dirty. I texted back and forth with a friend about where to eat. I let the room teach me its noises. The fridge's rubbery whir, the hairline expand and contract of pipes, the soft tick of ductwork. The apartment felt like a clean hotel that wished it was an apartment again. At the edge of my attention, the red dot kept doing its job, but it felt less like a status LED and more like a pupil. At 7, my sister called. We kept it to logistics and gossip. I paced while we spoke because the couch promised comfort, then withheld it. Each time my voice rose, the hall diode added an extra blink to its pattern like applause. I told myself, sensors notice changes, that's their job, no one is watching. The host pinged once more, late in the call. FYI, no need to speak softly. The sensor isn't listening, only measuring. I hadn't told him we were talking. I said ha into the receiver, and my sister asked why I was laughing at nothing. Just the internet, I said. I hung up, and the apartment resumed its slow red eyelids, opening and closing on me like a promise it was trying to keep. It was nothing. Then it wasn't. I was rinsing a knife that hadn't deserved to be called sharp when a faint sting announced itself at the base of my right thumb where the skin is thin and careless. A red thread welled, sensible and small. I stood under the faucet considering whether to be dramatic, and my phone vibrated on the counter. Bandages under the bathroom sink, right side drawer. The soap dish has a tiny chip. Watch your thumb. I read it twice, then looked at the dish. The ceramic, bone white, wore a sliver out of one edge like a missing tooth. I hadn't touched the dish. I keep hotel soaps on their paper because public porcelain unnerves me. The cut hadn't existed a minute ago, and was no one's problem but mine. The message felt like someone had turned the page before I knew it was a page. How did you know that? I typed, trying to keep the question small. The 3 dots appeared, then a reply with a cheerfulness so even it felt poured rather than written. We add tips over time from guest experience. The chip's been sneaking up on people, getting replaced next week. Hope the Band-Aids help. I pressed the edge of the chip with my thumbnail to prove to myself it was real. It was. The red diode above me blinked its slow nothing. I pressed a bandage on, then sat at the table with the cut held at my chest like a child who's not hurt, just baffled. My laptop booted into an obligation I was pretending to meet. Music felt safer than silence, so I put on a piano trio, something with brushes that doesn't give a room too much to think about. 2 bars in, my phone buzzed. Love the record. Perfect for the hardwood. Keep it under 50 dB after 9. Thank you. I stared at the sentence until it blurred. How would you know what I'm playing? I wrote. We don't, he replied. The system flags patterns and sometimes suggests genre. It's silly, but useful. Useful to whom, I wondered, and a stupid heat climbed into my scalp like shame. I went hunting for facts to bring the feeling down. In the Wi-Fi app, the network's device list populated. 2 items labeled Nest Protect LR and Nest Protect Hall. Their icons little white circles. 1 minute living. A familiar trio with names that might as well be a chorus. Protect, Protect, Minute. The Minute brand I'd seen in an article about privacy-safe sensors. It claimed no audio. It measured acoustic pressure, motion, temperature, humidity. It could detect occupancy without listening. If you squinted, it could do everything except hear, except see, except it knew when to congratulate me on jazz. I stepped onto a chair, which felt idiotic and transgressive all at once. and angled my phone's flashlight at the living room smoke detector. The face of it gave back a scatter of dull reflections, the little sensor grid, the harsh circle of the test button, plus a point of brightness deep inside that wasn't a camera, couldn't be a camera, but registered to the part of my brain that catalogs threats as a lens. I lowered the light, and the red diode pulsed like a heartbeat you feel through a pillow. A sticker along the rim said, "Do not remove, building managed." On the minute puck, a hairline seam suggested a tiny speaker grill, though the documentation insisted no recording, no playback. I told myself the seam was for air, for pressure. I climbed down. "Just confirming," I wrote, because grown-ups write emails when they're scared. "Do you have any indoor cameras?" The welcome sheet says no, your message says no, but your texts reference things as if you're seeing in. He came back fast, like he'd prepared the sentence 2 years ago and kept it in a drawer. "We do not have cameras inside, only a doorbell camera. Our system sends automated check-ins using the sensor's data, not audio or video. Apologies if the timing felt weird." Timing is the polite word for it. Timing is how a magician convinces you she didn't touch what she touched. I tried to be scientific because that makes me feel better about losing. I stood under the minute, then stepped to the hall, then back. The red diode in the hall quickened when I spoke, 3 quick pulses as if counting my words. In the living room, the diode seemed to wait for me to finish, then blinked once as if to say, "There, you're done." I picked up my bag and moved it from one chair to another. The minute's tiny status light, green so faint you'd call it absent unless you were looking, woke and went to sleep with the gesture. Motion sen. Sore, I told myself, and of course it was. I pressed my palm flat on the wall under the device like a person promising to be good. At 10, the host sent another of the chirp bright pings that act like help while keeping score. "Everything working for you? Love that you set the throw like that. Magazine ready." I looked at the throw. I had folded it the way I always fold them. Uneven ends tucked under, zipper seam hidden, and suddenly the room felt filleted, like my edges were showing through my clothes. "Looks great," I typed with my teeth. The red diode blinked again. I tried to sleep with the lights off. The living room detector's red pulse threw the smallest ember onto the ceiling every 50 seconds, the kind of interval that stretches time. The hall's diode ticked twice, then went mute long enough for me to think it had died, then found its rhythm again. I lay there picturing their logic trees, the decision-making hidden inside, if, then, else, invisible branches made of other people's data. The cut on my thumb throbbed like it was trying to be a character in the story. I placed a dish towel over my eyes to blot the ember and felt foolish. Then I took the towel off and draped it for a second over the living room detector to see if I could make the room dark enough to believe in. The phone buzzed before I could pull my hand away. "Please do not cover life safety devices. Removing or obstructing will trigger an alert and fee. Thanks." I plucked the towel down like I'd been caught with my foot on a chair. Of course, the system knew. That's its job. I moved to the bedroom, which felt safer by virtue of distance, and shut the door. The crack under the door leaked the red blink into a tiny wedge that kept proving the hall existed. I slipped my cut hand under the pillow because pressure makes a lot of little pains feel managed. I tried to pretend the trio with Brew. She was still playing in the other room like an apology. Each time I got close to sleep, a text would land with the soft thud of a shoe someone keeps dropping so you'll know they're there. "Thanks for keeping it low. Just a reminder, no candle burning. FYI, our doorbell sometimes counts movement in the hall. No worries." They were small notes, banal, automated, plausible. Banal is a powerful disguise. In the morning, I pulled myself into the light and watched the detectors make their case for normalcy. The red dots did their job. The kitchen puck slept in its white skin. The cut looked like what it was, a thin complaint that would close by lunch. The message thread looked like what it was too, a host minding the machine that minds the building that minds you. I tried to reconstruct the doorbell's angle. Could it have caught the sweater in the hallway glass? Maybe. Could it have seen me come back from the corner deli and register that I'd put it on again? Possibly. Could it have seen my thumb under a faucet inside the kitchen? No. Unless I'd held the door open. Unless I'd been standing in exactly the wrong place. Unless something else had eyes it swore it didn't. I wrote him because a ritual needs an ending. Checking out early, work shuffle. Place was spotless, thanks. He replied with the kind of warmth you send to strangers you hope will not think about you again. "You were great. Appreciate you respecting house rules. Hope the thumb's okay. That sweater color really suits the space. Safe travels." It was such a strange act of intimacy, to comment on how a color looked on me inside a room that wasn't mine, as if the room and I had coordinated without his help. In other rentals since, I practice a dumb choreography. I look up the second I enter. I map the small red lights and decide how to position myself under them so I can pretend they're stars. I turn my phone's camera to selfie and scan the ceiling for the glint. That means a lens because the trick of a lens is also the trick of a shiny screw. I find the minute when it's there and nod to it like I recognize an old neighbor. I tell myself everything is measurable now and I am no one special, just data smoothed across a curve of 1,000 stays. That's supposed to comfort. It doesn't always. At night, with the lights off, the tiniest LED can feel like a mind. I remind myself, smoke, carbon monoxide, these things kill in silence, and the red dot is a promise that something will scream on my behalf. I try to keep that thought close when the dot brightens as I cross the room or when a text arrives with an apology for the timing. The mind of the building is helpful, it says, and blind. It says it can't see me. It only knows I'm here. Somewhere, a line exists between the knowing and the seeing, and I am most afraid in the hour when I can't remember where it is. I dragged my bag down a side path to the garden-level door, motion lights waking one by one like I was a problem they were prepared to solve. The door was heavy, the kind that sticks at the frame as if the building is clenching. Inside, a studio assembled out of catalog promises, concrete floor sealed to a soft shine, a rug like a small dark lake, a bed tucked under a high shelf, a kitchenette with honest steel and the minimal courage of 2 pans. The smell was a coin split between fresh paint and sumped water, clean and earth-wet at the same time. 2 things I clocked immediately, a dehumidifier purring in the corner with a belly of water, and a white granular line running around the baseboards like chalked crime scene tape. Not efflorescence creeping up the walls. This was poured, deliberate, a line of table salt, uneven in places where someone's hand had lost confidence. At the threshold, the salt thickened to a little drift, as if a person had poured extra at the mouth of 2. He roomed and then thought better of it. Under the bed, a paler ribbon glowed in the low light. If a ritual starts with the details, this one was competent without calling itself out loud. I messaged the host because that's the pact we make with strangers now. We compare notes on the same rooms and agree to be reasonable. Hey, made it. Quick question. There's a line of salt along the baseboards. Should I sweep it up? He replied quickly. Thank you for asking, polite. It's an old building at garden level. Salt discourages pests, slugs, etc., and helps keep moisture down. Totally safe. If it bothers you aesthetically, you can sweep light sections, but please leave it in place near the door and under the bed. He added a smiley that sat wrong under the words, discourages pests. I unpacked in the careful way you do in a space that looks like it belongs to a magazine more than a person. Socks in a drawer, book on the nightstand for show, toothbrush in a travel cup so I wouldn't have to lay it on the sink. The ceiling was a shade lower than comfort. High on the wall, a narrow egress window admitted a view of ankles passing on the sidewalk, the occasional scuff of a shoe, and the hiss of a bike tire. When the radiator woke, it spoke in a soft, wet language, more sigh than heat. Walking from door to bed, my steps sounded bigger than my weight. There's a particular echo in basements, a slapback that rides the concrete, and I told myself that was what I was hearing, the room's version of call and response. Except when I stopped, the sound didn't die with me. There was a second heel, a soft toe, a half-beat behind. I stood still enough to hear my blood. The room held its breath. I took one step. The extra footfall landed after mine, close enough to feel like a shadow with weight. It was nothing, I told myself. Above me somebody moved? No, the ceiling didn't complain the way old joists do. It felt like the noise was down here, on my level. There was a welcome sheet on the table with the usual list, quiet hours, recycling, how to empty the dehumidifier if it fill. Ed in the night. Please leave it on, the printed line said, underlined. I touched its warm plastic and felt the faint tremble of something useful. The salt line along the baseboard starred in every glance. It didn't feel like a cleaner's oversight. It felt like a plan. I cooked eggs because cooking makes a room submit to being a room. The pan huffed at the burner. The fan over the stove was too loud, then not loud enough. When I carried the plate from the kitchenette to the little table, the second set of steps came with me. A soft borrow of sound, my own stride repeated by a second body that had learned to stay just out of reach. I told myself to stop being romantic about physics. Concrete turns every move into percussion. That's it, that's all. Still, when I brushed my teeth and crossed to the bed, I took 3 quick steps, daring whatever echo to keep pace. It did, polite, half a heart behind. It declared itself quietly. I got up to fill the dehumidifier's tank, an old habit, learned from a moldy apartment I once loved. The water inside sloshed with the thick sound of a hard day's work. When I lifted the reservoir, the extra step arrived with me, just where it always was, 1 beat after. as if we'd rehearsed together and it had promised never to steal my line. If I paused mid-stride, the second footfall still fell, late by a breath, like finishing a sentence after someone else stops listening. When I pivoted hard on my heel in a childish attempt to catch it, I got that hair prickle at the back of my neck that says someone stepped when I turned, but I didn't catch anyone. Just me, dripping a little, the tank heavy in my hands. I tested it because that's how I try to cut a fear small enough to swallow. I walked a figure 8 around the rug and the table, crisp heel to toe, then in socks, then barefoot. The second steps adapted, never overlaying mine, never starting. Without me, never entering a space first. I sidestepped. It sidestepped after. I tried an awkward skipping rhythm I haven't used since childhood. It made me laugh, a startled bark I didn't recognize, and the second step landed behind the mess of it like it had waited for the rule change and agreed to abide by it. I set my phone on the table, hit record on a voice memo, and walked the room again. Listening back, there was only me. Hard step, softer step, no second cadence, no fainter foot. The microphone's ignorance felt like betrayal. My ears swore the second pattern was there. My device reported I had been alone. Sleep seemed possible as long as I didn't have to cross the floor. I made a small settlement on the bed, a book open to prove that sleep would arrive by accident, not design. Somewhere near midnight, a grit sound whispered from the baseboards, the kind of dry hiss salt makes when a toe drags through it. No drama, no sweep, just a little correction. I told myself it was air from the vent fidgeting a few grains into a group. I knew the sound of salt moved by a shoe. It was not that. It was lighter and slenderer, like someone tracing a line rather than stepping over it. At 2, the room under the egress window cooled, and the cat I'd seen earlier on the sidewalk announced itself with a deep, questioning meow that carried like a person. I got up to use the bathroom, and the second steps found me again, obligingly imprecise. In the mirror, my face looked like I'd had a long conversation with a version of myself who didn't trust me. On the way back to bed, I deliberately walked inside the line of salt along the baseboard to see what would happen, to give the echo nowhere clean to fall. After I lay down, there was another small hiss, the sound of salt compressing in 2 small arcs near the bed. I propped myself up on an elbow and watched the dark, willing nothing to see me back. In the morning, I did inventory. The salt at the threshold had a slight divot, as if something had leaned into it. Along the wall by the kitchenette, 2 small crescent disturbances curved inward. Barefoot, I placed my own foot next to them, and my heel swallowed more salt than either crescent had disturbed. The arcs were shorter than my stride, narrower, toes turned a little in, like the print of a child or a careful adult. I took a photo and got a smear of white that looked like exactly what it was, a mess that means nothing if you want it to. I texted the host because better to write than to go strange in your own head. Hi, quick note, the salt line looks disturbed by the bed and door. I didn't sweep it. Should I add more? He wrote, no worries, happens with airflow. There's extra salt under the sink if you want it tidy. Please keep it continuous near the door. It helps. Helps what? I didn't ask. That afternoon, I vacuumed a segment along one wall and repoured a clean line, steady hand, a teacher making a chalk border. I placed 3 coins along it like tiny anchors. Then I walked away and tried not to think about coins. A few hours later, 1 coin had tilted, its edge pressed into the salt as if something had nudged it with a small, imprecise pressure. The others sat smug, unhelpful. This is the thing about proof. You have to want it to be possible. After dark, I tried one more test. I counted out loud, tightening my stride to the numbers. 1, 2, 1, 2. The second set matched me. Late, loyal. I stopped at 1 and felt the second heel land for 2 behind me like we'd made a promise and it was keeping it graciously. I slept with the lamp on because surrendering all the way felt like volunteering. The light found a vein in the paint and made it a horizon. Dust did their aerial ballet in the updraft from the radiator. Near 3, I woke to the feeling of someone walking up behind me in a grocery store line. A pressure, not a touch. The room was still. Then, the faintest pinch of sound at the foot of the bed where the salt line thickened, like someone thinking about stepping and deciding against it. I lay without moving until my hips started to go numb and made the decision for me. When I stretched, the second step arrived with my own, courteous, not trying to be noticed. Morning downgraded it. Things always do. The salt at the threshold was more obviously smudged into a shallow saucer. On the wall near the bathroom, a new small arc lay inside the line, not over it, like a foot had tested the boundary and stepped back. I tried to make it mine. I put my bare foot down beside it, tried to angle my toes in to match. My print was larger, wider. The arc in the salt looked narrower at the heel, the toe marks faint, almost not there, as if the weight had landed on the midfoot. I found myself thinking of dancers the way they habitually land with a lifted arch from years of training. The thought felt borrowed. I didn't want to keep it. I made a list of reasons so I wouldn't make a story instead. Basements carry structure-borne sound. Neighbors' footsteps travel sideways and become yours. Concrete reflections create a slap-back timed close to your stride length. Salt shifts in drafts. Coins tilt because floors are never truly level. Dehumidifiers pull air and send it in little currents that move what looks immovable. I looked up, flutter echo, and read about parallel surfaces setting up a ping-pong of sound. I clapped and listened to the room's return. What came back was a chirp, not a footstep, not a shadow stride. It proved a point I didn't need and avoided the one I wanted. I told the host I'd be checking out a day early, which has become my version of saying uncle. He said, "No problem, we appreciate you staying." Then, because he couldn't help himself or because he wanted to, he added, "Thanks for maintaining the salt." Line. We've had fewer complaints about footsteps from neighbors since we started that. Have a great trip. He didn't say whose footsteps, he didn't say which neighbors. He left room for me to be reasonable. On my last pass through the room, I noticed the salt under the bed had drawn itself into a series of smooth parentheses where before it had been one steady ribbon. The little egress window showed a pair of shins pause on the sidewalk, hesitate, then carry on. When I rolled my bag to the door and lifted the handle, there it was again, the companion step at my back, faithful as a hand on my shoulder. I held the handle longer than I needed to and waited for it to pass me by. It didn't. It didn't lead. It didn't leave. I stepped out, and the second step landed on the other side of the threshold after mine, like a person following you through a closing door. Outside, the day was honest and chill. I dragged my bag up the little concrete stairs to the street, scuff, scuff, my breath making dragon shapes. Halfway up, I stepped aside like I do when someone needs to pass. No one passed. I laughed, too loud, an apology to the morning, and kept going. In other rentals since, my ears tilt toward floors. I catch myself varying my stride like a person trying to shake a tail. I see salt and feel relief and then resentment because relief means I believe in something I can't defend in daylight. The worst part is how quickly my body adopts a new rule. If there's another step, it will never go first. That should be comforting, and sometimes it is, something else agreeing to follow. Other times, standing at the sink with my weight on one hip, I feel the floor behind me register something that isn't there and imagine, briefly, a person whose job it is to stay exactly at my back, learning my rhythm grain by grain. I try not to test for it, I try not to count, but I still listen for a sec. On heel, and when I don't hear it, I'm not convinced that means it's gone. I picked the dome for the sky. That was the whole point, to get out from under ceilings that insist on themselves. The listing had those wide-angled photos. White hexagons glowing like a clean cathedral, a low bed under a porthole skylight, a promise of zero light pollution that sounded borderline religious. Directions were a screenshot with a red line drawn across tan nothing, GPS unreliable past the county road, and an instruction to find the blue flag tied to a creosote bush and turn there. Cell service kind of ghosted me at the last mile. The road thinned from pavement to grated dirt to a suggestion. The dome sat alone on a slight rise like a dropped pearl, the horizon a 360-degree invitation. The lockbox stuck, metal against metal warmed all day, then shocked by the first angle of night. When it gave, it did so with a sound like a knuckle popped too eagerly. Inside smelled clean in a way that felt newly invented. Sun-baked plastic, the soft neutral of wash lines, a hint of juniper someone must have brought in on their sleeves. The interior was a geometry you could feel, triangles stitching into pentagons, stitching into a sphere that made my eye want to count. Under the circular skylight, a bed with white sheets pretended this was about rest rather than spectacle. A battery inverter hummed a quiet argument with itself in a utility nook. A jug of water sat on a wooden crate with a note that said, "Use sparingly," which made each sip feel like a small crime. The acoustics were their own odd comfort. My voice didn't echo so much as soften and return as a companion, the way a person repeats your order to the barista to prove they've got you. When I dropped my bag, the thump curled back around the curve and tapped my shoulder. A laminated sheet leaned against a lantern. "Welcome to the dome. Solar-powered. Please turn off overheads at night to enjoy the stars. Weather. Can move fast. Secure the door. Nearest neighbor, 1.7 miles. Water and propane are limited resources." It didn't say anything about listening, because why would it? Outside, the day exhaled heat. A low wind lifted and settled the scrub like a patient hand, and when it touched the dome it whispered in a way that sounded like a fact. This structure is lighter than the land it sits on. The deck boards were pale, bleached by 1,000 suns. Sand collected in the seams like punctuation. Far off, a late plane drew a line too straight for nature. The quiet wasn't absolute. The desert has its own tiny machinery. The zipper of a distant insect you can't see. the hollow clack of something thorny shifting into its better posture for evening. When the blue slid into violet, I lay on the bed and watched the skylight cut a circle out of the sky. Stars came on in a measured way, not a spray so much as a laying down of points, here, then here, then here, as if plotted. I could pick out Orion without a fight. The Dipper found me like it knows my childhood. If you stare long enough at scattered points, your brain starts to lay strings between them. Still, there was a tidy to it that made my mouth go dry. The Milky Way rinsed itself across the circle like soap in a bowl of clean water. The first oddness was little enough to be nothing. I said hi, not to anyone, just to the world in the casual way you do when you're alone and want proof of it. High above me, some bright, unimportant star quivered, not blinked, quivered, like it was riding a smaller air current than the rest. I told myself that was atmosphere, that I'd just learned the word seeing in an article about telescopes and wanted a chance to use it. I said, "This is ridiculous," out loud to dislodge the feeling from the inside of my ribs. A second star, 1 beat away, seemed to shift a half hair closer to its neighbor, not a nutcase. To make sense, enough to make me sit up. I ate sitting on the edge of the bed, watching the circle. The inverter's hum sank a degree, then rose as if calibrating. When the wind pushed, the dome made small adjustments in its skeleton that read, "If you were inclined, like patience." I clicked off the interior light and the sky flooded me with its correctness. The circle felt too neat. My breath sounded like I'd turned up the gain on myself. Everything was poised, like a stage before someone walks on. The dome has a kind of whisper test it runs. Speak softly and you hear yourself by two routes. Air to ear and air to panel to air to ear. The second version softened and later. I started because I wanted to hear that double again. "Are you seeing this?" I asked no one, intending to be rhetorical. A line of faint stars, too faint to be satellites, too steady to be planes, felt like they tightened their spacing, like beads scooted closer on a slack string. I told myself about the autokinetic effect, how in the dark, a fixed light can appear to move because your eyes microsaccade. I said left, testing myself as much as anything, and the sweep of stars in one quadrant seemed to drift that way, like a slow tide that decided to humor me. Maybe the whole sky was drifting. Maybe I'd chosen a corner to pin and all else moved relative to that. I made a shape with my finger, a little arc, and felt the shame of making requests of a phenomenon that does not take requests. Then, quieter than my own breathing, like a took too long to believe in coincidence, a meteor scratched the line I had drawn a half-second earlier. The timing about killed me. I laughed with my mouth closed so the sound couldn't leave. Outside the dome, something shuffled sand. Hissed is too strong a word for it. Whispered is closer. I told myself it was the wind changing teeth. I lay back and made an experiment of it because I would rather apply rules to a weirdness than let it widen. 1, I said. A bright point near the edge twitched. 2, another close in toward the center of the circle seemed to respond. 3, nothing behaved, or everything did and I couldn't see it for what it was. I counted again, and this time I tried to be less precise in my need. A strip of sky in the north flickered. 3 small pulses. It could have been 3 independent events I made into one. It looked like a scent. The sound at the deck grew itself into an action. Not wind across a flat, but pressure into something granular and resistant. I propped the lantern so it threw light in a slow apron toward the door. Through the skylight cut, the sand I could see was darker than the boards. Textured like velvet, dragged the wrong direction. I hadn't been outside since I came in. Still, a single line of prints, human absent the certainty of shoe tread, heel kiss then toe, shallow at the arch, made a neat path from the line where the deck yielded to sand to the base of the dome's door. They stopped there like someone had respected a threshold. I lifted my hands from the bed covers to prove to myself I had not moved, and a few grains clicked down the slope like punctuation. There are 1,000 banal explanations for prints. A neighbor visiting when you were in the bathroom. Your own earlier steps you are misremembering. Animal pads stretched by erosion into humanish ovals. The shadow of the deck rail making a trick of depth. The stop-start pattern at the door was oddly convincing. The prints came to the door, turned slightly as if a shoulder had presented, then turned back toward the open. I opened the dome and stood with my hand on the handle without actually stepping out. The air felt like water that had remembered being warm. The sand glow under the lantern widened. Nothing moved. The stars above me held their positions like they were pinning a map. Back on the bed, the relief of the mattress around my shoulders made a shape my body recognized. I said closer, because I am not a person who learns quickly to keep her mouth shut. At the deck line, a single new print slurred into being. Not fully, Not the way pressed weight makes a clean edge, but as if the sand had been asked for a mark and agreed reluctantly. It could have been the wind collapsing a ridge. It could have been a small creature's belly drag expanded by the idea of a heel. Elsewhere in the sky, directly over my face, a bright point seemed to step in a fraction toward the center. I held my breath as if that could reset anything. Silence is not the absence of sound. It's the room agreeing to hear something else. In that quiet, I could hear the inverter's pitch shift when I whispered, and my brain made it a chorus. The sky, the machine, the sand, all titling their heads like dogs. I tried to catch it on my phone, the slow rearrangement I thought I was seeing, but the video played back as ordinary night. Stars drifting on the Earth's spin, a plane once, a bug crossing the lens like a comet. The sound file offered me the soft breath of fabric and the gentle, patient whir of a device paid to keep the bargain with the sun. My mouth discovered a dryness that read as fear, and I drank the water I'd promised myself to stretch over 3 days. It felt like the first sip after being told good news and bad. I tried not to say anything else, not because I believed the sky would do as told, but because I didn't like the idea that I might. The desert can make a person theatrical. There's no audience, and so you become one. When I finally slept, it was more like fainting. I woke in the half hour before dawn when the world is a negative waiting for light to develop it. The stars were fewer, or my eyes were more uncooperative. Outside the skylight, the line of prints had expanded by 2 steps, single file toward the far side of the deck where the lantern light didn't reach. I had not left the bed. My throat found a pulse of laughter again because what else? And I pressed the heel of my hand to my sternum until I could stand my own heartbeat. Morning flattens miracles into chores. The desert day unrolled color across the land like a blanket. A curve of low mountains winked into edges. The dome's white went from cosmic to dental. I opened the door with a performative normalcy and stepped out onto the boards. The prints were sober in daylight, less eerie than administrative. Heel, toe, narrow arch, a shy turning in of the toes, each one a little deeper toward the midfoot. They ran to the door and then away again, a there-and-back track with a pause point at the threshold. The sand's surface had crusted a little overnight and flaked under my step, which made the prints that had already been made seem older than my fresh ones. I followed them until they went thinner, then gave up. They did not lead to another dome or a road or a neighbor's fence. They lived and died at the deck. I still looked for animal sign, rabbit pellets, the piano key tracks of a roadrunner, the stipple of something small that drags its tail. The prints I had were plain and human, with the notable exception of the missing messiness around them. My shoes, when I tested, scuffed a fringe. These didn't. I told myself a person had come at dusk, maybe a host checking the propane, and then the wind had tidied everything except where the weight was heaviest. That's almost worse. A person came and saw me through the dome as I lay and turned around without knocking, the desert finishing their erasure for them. I made coffee on the single-burner stove and watched the sky with an intentional lack of curiosity. Blue fulled in. The stars at the edges retreated. The last points, stubborn and bright, kept their posts until they were dismissible. I tried once more with a recording, a daytime one, narrating into my phone like a person who wants to make a rational record. I think last night I was experiencing autokinesis and a dust devil that laid down a dotted line. I've been tired. The acoustics are weird. On playback, my voice sounded a little higher than I think of it, and I could hear the inverter's whine shifting as I spoke. It made something in me tighten. It wasn't that the sky was listening. It was that the dome was. It turned my volume into a slight change in draw. Machines always answer you. You just have to be looking. I texted the host halfway between joke and need. Do you ever get weird footprints around the deck? He sent a smiley I didn't want, and you're in good company. Folks are always seeing things in the desert. Wind draws, wind erases. If you see big cat prints, let me know. Otherwise, enjoy the stars tonight. I said thanks because we were both playing our parts. The directness of the day made me generous. I swept the deck with the borrowed broom and pretended I was erasing an embarrassing note I'd written to myself. The sand huffed against the bristles with that silky, dry sound that logic can live in. I stayed one more night because leaving would have made it serious. I decided a rule: no speaking. I could read, I could think, but I wouldn't give anything instructions in a language I also used to order coffee. At dusk, the circle filled again. The bat hour clicked on. Coyotes tried out sentences in the dip beyond the ridge, questioning, then declarative, then nothing. I lay there trying to be blank. I thought left and the stars did whatever it is stars do. I thought closer and my breath hitched without company. The dome carried my insufficiency back to me like a lullaby. I slept straight through until a cold seam of dawn cut me into waking. The deck that morning was clean except for 2 prints, spaced wider than before, halfway to the edge like a person had started to come and changed their mind. Each was just imperfect enough to be explainable by wind. I let them be wind. I made the bed, wiped the dust from the low shelf where I'd kept my book, and shut the door on the hum of a machine that had fed on my sentences and given me power in return. In the rear view, the dome looked like a dropped bead someone had never come back for. Back in the city, I caught myself testing the sky through scratches of rooftop. I'd say a word under my breath and wait for a plane to oblige me, for a satellite to trail where I'd pointed. It felt childish and unkind, like turning your head for a dog you haven't called and then blaming the dog. I read about Starlink trains and learned they can arrive like a procession, the timing neat enough to be prayer. I learned about footstep illusions in sand, how a wind with a bit of pressure carves and drops in ways your brain reads as human. I learned enough to write myself out of it on paper. The body is stubborn, though. Lying in bed now, in rooms with ceilings that insist nothing above them can be asked to move, I sometimes whisper a number and count, equal parts relief and disappointment when the darkness stays still. And sometimes, when the radiator takes a breath just as I finish a sentence, a softness rises in me that I only ever felt once before, under a round of glass, where the sky felt like it had been waiting for me to speak, so it could make a small private adjustment I still can't prove.